Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started. There's quite a few people yet to attend, but it's quite normal for people to join later. At the end of this session, we will actually be running a poll to see which particular webinar or vlog content you'd find most useful. And right at the end of the presentation, there should be a little questionnaire. If you can fill that in, then we'll make sure that the webinars and the vlogs that we do in the future will be the sort of content you're looking for. Now, this webinar is a particularly interesting one for me. Annie and I have been working together for many years. And before I came across Annie, I'd had some issues understanding sometimes team behavior, but also Chinese suppliers and Chinese clients. And I was coming into some difficulties. So I'm really hoping that this morning will give a starter, a taster, for want of a better term, as to some of the ways that you can tackle these issues. This is a two-part series. We may well make it a three-part series, depending on what people say on the questionnaire at the end. But essentially, we're going to tackle today the main ways that you can basically better understand your teams to get better output from your marketing. So it's very, very marketing focused. And we have attendees on this webinar across all sectors: hotel and hospitality, education, B2B, very complex B2B, hospitals, you name it. So I really hope you get something out of it. There is a Q&A chat box, which I'm not monitoring, lovely Melody is, on this webinar. So please do submit your questions. We've allowed 15 minutes at the end to answer them. If we don't get through them all, then what I will do is myself or Annie will later on today get back to you with the answers to those questions via email. So please, as we go along, ask as many questions as you like and we'll do our best to get through them. Next slide, please, Melody, or next two slides. Next one, please. So what brought me to this juncture? 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I wasn't in the Chinese market. I was in the digital market. Then I found myself working for a Chinese agency. I had never worked with Chinese staff or suppliers or clients before. And that brings me fast forward to 7 years on, where I currently manage a team of 24 Chinese national staff, both in my China office and in my London office. But in addition to that, I'm having to negotiate and communicate with distributors, suppliers, media owners, Chinese clients, as well as stakeholders all over the world on behalf of my clients. One of the areas of expertise that I now have with Annie in the organization is actually to mold teams and to get the best out of teams. And I can honestly say from experience that if there are any issues around culture, it's normally just misunderstanding, no more than that. But if you don't understand each other, it's very, very difficult to get the output from your marketing that you need. So moving on to why we need to understand culture. Next slide, please. An awful lot of clients that I speak to don't actually come across any issues initially. I'll be honest, it tends to be a few months before you start to see cracks. So I know there's a number of you on this webinar, a number of people I know quite well that have had distributor relationship problems. So if you are an e-tailer, a retailer, one of the first ways you're going to distribute your product in China is to have a distributor agreement, a contract. And having a good relationship with your distributor is absolutely vital, but you have to understand each other. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I've already had a couple of people submit some questions around distribution. So absolutely vital that your distributor understands, if they are in control of your marketing, what that means, and that they are doing that on brand. And we're going to talk a lot more about that next week. But distributors and supply chain is as important as immediate staff. The other thing is knowing how to motivate your Chinese marketing teams, both here and in China or in any APAC region, understanding what issues they might face, what obstacles they might face, and how to motivate them is pretty critical to getting them to do what you require of them. And often it's just a question of how one delivers that brief that is tantamount to what has happened with some of our clients, quite a few major PR disasters. So briefing, we're going to talk about when we move on to Annie's section in a little bit. Cultural nuances when it comes to marketing campaigns. We're not going to touch on this too much today. That's more next week. And we are also going to be running a webinar on naming and branding. But one can't have missed some very, very quite crucial PR disasters in the last few years and months from brands where the marketing campaign has been driven from, say, Italy, France, Spain, or UK, without any checking of whether or not it is sensitive or even appeals or is even correct or right for the target markets in China. That is very, very critical piece. But if your marketing team and you aren't aligned and you're not working together, you're going to have some significant problems. Negotiation, this is a big one, and this is the reason why a lot of you are here. Negotiation in terms of understanding distributors, negotiation in terms of media owners, negotiation in terms of better rates, negotiation with supply chain, negotiation with your team is a critical part of, I would say, the biggest difference between the way that UK or British people behave versus, and the way that we're brought up and schooled versus how I would negotiate with, say, a Chinese supplier or work with my team. And Annie's going to talk quite a lot about that today. And the other thing is just motivational patterns and working patterns. We do things in a very structured way in Britain. And one of the biggest learnings in lockdown for me has been watching how UK culture is largely unraveled and then come back into a new normal, where I've watched companies that aren't international and have got used to the fact that they're having to offer flexibility to staff. So we're going to talk a little bit about motivation and working patterns and lateness and keeping time, which is a big issue for a lot of my brands working with China. Just to be very clear, this webinar can't and won't replace the need for a Mandarin speaker. It can't replace the need for having somebody in your organization or a supplier, an agency or a consultant that is a good copywriter, and I state copywriter, that's very important, not just a Mandarin speaker, and a marketing expert. It's not replacing any of those things. It's just so you can better understand each other to get the best output so that you can avoid catastrophic pitfalls. Next slide, please, Melody. So marketing context. So that's why we're all here. Everybody on this webinar is in the marketing field in one way or another, and are having issues with some part of the supply chain to do with marketing. So these are the critical things that Annie's sort of training session today on culture, and Annie will introduce her background into how she helps our clients, is very much around the following. So how does one deliver a better marketing brief to get the right output from your teams? That could be a Chinese member of staff here who's working in a solitary environment, as in they're the only Chinese member of staff, or it could be a team in China, or it could be an outsourced team such as an agent, or it could be a salesperson that's working for you remotely in China. They all still need to get a sales and a marketing brief, and they need to understand what you're trying to do. Motivating them. This is a really critical thing, because you're not going to hop on a plane every 5 minutes to go and visit your team. And this is something I used to advocate a lot. In previous workshops, I used to say to my brands, if you're not there once a quarter at least, you've got a problem. Now, we can't get there at the moment. We're not allowed in. So it's very, very important that you know how to motivate your stakeholder groups and your teams, and that you have a lot of face time with them, and that they understand what's expected of them, but they feel support. And Annie will talk about that later on. Managing the quality of marketing output. Nobody knows what's expected of them unless they're clear about what the KPIs are. And that may well have to be delivered from somebody other than the person on this webinar. It may be that there's an interim manager that you can put in that can do more of the day-to-day minutiae and more of the micromanagement. And we'll talk about that later. Also, deadlines. This for me is a biggie. All of my staff are very anglicised. They've all had postgrads, undergrads here, and they've worked in the UK for some time before they're employed by Emerging Communications. That's something that we're very, very big on. But if that isn't the case and you're dealing with a China team who's never come to the UK, meeting deadlines is a really, really critical issue, especially as timekeeping is not taken as seriously as it is here in the UK. And he's going to talk about that a bit later. And the final thing is sales targets. So this is more for your sales teams, not your marketing teams, but quite often, I'd say in 80% of the cases, and most people on this webinar will have the same team doing sales and marketing, which personally, I don't think is the right answer. I think you have marketers that deliver leads to salespeople who close them, but quite often in the Chinese market, that's not an option. And you may well be reliant on a distributor to do your marketing. So they're doing the sales and the marketing, essentially. You may be reliant on an agent to do the marketing on your behalf. They're doing the sales and the marketing. You may have a university sales team who are also doing the marketing. And so it's absolutely critical that you are very aware that they're two separate pieces, and you're very clear on what the KPIs are and what's the marketing going to be to drive those leads and to drive those targets for your sales teams to meet. Next slide, please. So a lot of you may say to me, if you're not having issues, no, back one, thank you. What happens if I don't do anything? And I have to say, with most of the brands that we've helped over the last 7 years, quite often a lot doesn't happen. It takes a while for things, for the cracks to show. It may take months, it might take weeks, it could take 6 months. But then what happens if you don't embrace the cultural nuances and you don't find a really, really good way to communicate with your stakeholders in China and here in the UK, you end up with the following issues. The first most critical one is brand dilution. This happens with a lot of distributor agreements. So if you've tasked a distributor in China to distribute your product, and it's assumed that they're doing your marketing, or you've agreed that they're doing your marketing, and they're not following global brand guidelines, you end up with a very localized approach. And by localized, I don't just mean Chinese approach. I mean localized to the geography that they're responsible for and the consumers that they're responsible for. And this quite often could be so off brand. And I've seen so many instances where I will go over to China and see an ad campaign for a brand that I know very well, only to find that there is absolutely no alignment whatsoever. And you then end up with issues where your brand could well be positioned far too down market, and you might be a luxury brand, or that the consumers have come up with another name for you, or even worse, you end up with massive reputational damage that you can't fix. So that's the first reason why it's important. The second one we've come across in the last few years is lost leads and sales. This could quite simply be a university team that is so overworked because they're doing sales and marketing and so under-resourced that they're not answering the inquiries on WeChat and Weibo. And they have been tasked to do that. Their agency hasn't. And it takes 2-3 days, sometimes a week, to get back to somebody, by which time they've moved on to another university. And that's just one of many examples that we see. We even had an instance a few years ago where a university sales team actually put an auto reply saying, "We're too busy to answer you right now, we'll get back to you when we can." Well, obviously that's terrible customer service. And the minute we noticed, we did something about it on their behalf, and it got fixed. But had we not been there, I don't know what would have happened. It also goes on to something as simple as there's bad PR on one of your social channels and it's not picked up, or there's bad PR on not one of your social channels in China and it's not picked up. There was a massive issue with Virgin Atlantic a few years ago. There's been issues with a lot of brands around this. So social listening is very important. But again, this comes down to regular communication and understanding with your China teams. And I think the worst thing I've seen in the entire time I've been doing this is the selling on of leads. So a sales team that felt so alienated and so lonely and so undervalued that they went in, took their paycheck and passed their leads on to a competitor. And that only happened because their boss never FaceTimed them via WeChat, didn't go and visit them. They didn't know what was expected. There was no clear brief. They felt very, very alienated and lonely, and the competitor picked this up and used it to their advantage. Now that really is worst case scenario, but you start to see that there is a theme here of really about valuing your stakeholders and your teams. And to that end, you end up with phenomenal marketing. And if you don't, you can end up with reputational damage, lost leads, and you're going to lose competitive advantage. Next slide, please. So the first step, and this is going to be a 2-part series, I'll be moving on to Annie in a minute, it's going to be to understand the communication styles of your stakeholder groups, your distributors, your agents, your staff, your clients, if you're dealing with Chinese clients, and to adapt the way you do things. So in other words, not doing things the way you normally do things. So you're changing your communication style. And if you find the middle ground that works for you both, you will then deliver phenomenal results. And being just aware of the nuances in culture is the first step, in my opinion. And once I understood it, and I started to change the ways I did things, and I still make mistakes, and as my team will tell me on a regular basis, but being aware of those nuances makes things a lot easier, and you're then able to deliver the messaging so much more coherently. And you end up with a situation where you're getting better results from everybody concerned. Next slide, please. So enough from me. And I'm going to move on to Annie. Annie and I have worked together for a couple of years now. She's also my Chinese teacher, which she has the patience of a saint because I'm not the best student. I'm very busy. And she's phenomenal. And she's helped countless brands over the years and countless companies understand culture with a view to doing better business. So I'm going to hand over to Annie and I'll be back at the end to take questions. So please keep your questions coming. Thank you for those that have submitted some. And I look forward to speaking to you at the end. Thanks. Over to you, Annie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Domenica. Next slide, please. Just a little bit introduction about myself. So my Chinese name is Jingjing Li. I'm a co-founder and the academic manager in Chinese School London. So recently, I'm a PhD candidate in UCL, focusing on education. My area is leadership and well-being. So I have extensive teaching experience both in UK and in China. I've teaching UK student here more than 3 years, almost 4 years now. Back to 10 years ago, I was teaching Chinese in China. During this kind of studying period time in UK, I helped a lot of UK companies to do a better understanding about Chinese culture, because before I moved here, I can feel the cultural differences really, really matters about our life. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to talk about a lot of Chinese culture. As you know, the Chinese culture are based on Confucianism, which we can see here. We have 3 highlights bullet point. One is a hierarchy, faith, and harmony. These 3 are all based on Confucianism. And today we're gonna talk about Chinese marketing, how you deal with Chinese culture, deal with your marketing. So we have a leadership style, time schedule, communication styles, and the negotiation styles to talk about. So now let's move on to talk about our Chinese culture hierarchy way. Next slide, please. How hierarchy works in China? Basically, we have 2 different groups, which is leaders and followers. Basically, for Chinese leaders, what we're gonna do, we just set direction, make our own decision. We never share opinion. We never ask follower. We just set up, tell you what I'm gonna decide. So it means we have high authority. For the followers, basically what you need to do, just follow and obey all the direction and the decision from your leaders. It means we fair to challenge our leaders. We can't say no, we always say yes. And we fail to express our feelings, even we feel like it's not all right. Maybe we have a better idea, but we don't share, because this kind of a distance obey. We need to always say yes to our boss. Next slide, please. For this culture, how impact our marketing? Basically, for employees, we will lack of ability, creativity to think independently. This is a lot of situation you will have. Basically, if you have Chinese team, they will always ask you what to do, what I need to do. If you give them open tasks like leaders, you will find difficult to assign open tasks. If you give them a task, if you give them detail, they will feel fair. They don't know what to do. They just depend on you, depend on their leaders. This is impact our marketing. You will find low work efficiency and poor completion quality because they don't know it. Then sometimes you find it's delay, always poor outcomes. What we're gonna suggest, how many solutions we can have to solve this problem? Basically, you need to make clear instructions to assign your task. You can give them a guideline to guide them 1, 2, 3, 4 steps to make them clear, follow your guideline to make sure they don't go to another direction you don't want. Next one, get line managers to assign tasks. For Chinese, we only follow our boss. It means our boss is the line manager, or if you are line manager, I will follow my manager. So it's always like that. If you are CEO, then you assign tasks, probably they don't want to listen or follow you. They just follow their boss. So find their boss to assign tasks to them. Third one, you need to cultivate employees' innovative thinking way. For Chinese people, we are kind of based on our culture. We are kind of like very dependent on our leaders. For that reason, our thinking way is a lack of innovatives. So for that reason, you need to train them and basically encourage them. When they make some progress, just praise them. Next slide, please. Second culture is face. Face culture is very famous in China. We always talk about keep our face, don't lose our face. It means face is very important in China. It's kind of our personal reputation. So for that reason, it's very important to save other people's face to build good relationships, because relationships is number one in China if you need to do a good business. For the face culture, for ourselves, our talking way is always indirectly keep in the middle, always keep in the middle. We won't give you very clear opinions. We can say, yes, I like, but we won't say, no, I don't like. Especially, we never say no, never say no. Even though we want to say no, we will say, yes, it's good. Yeah. We always say like that. For that reason, you always misunderstanding what they really saying, whether they say yes or whether they say no. And the other problem is, we do fair to do presentations, especially personal presentations. If I need to present something, I will feel, no, I can't do it. Why? Because we fail to be judged. Doesn't mean we are kind of like not very smart, very not skilled. It's not. Just because we are fair to be judged. For that reason, we fail to do presentation. And to other peoples, we never criticize them. Because criticize for Chinese people is very rude. For us, what we gonna do to other people? We always praise them. We give them a lot of compliments to show our humble, to show our pride. So that's why when you work with Chinese people, you always feel like, yeah, Chinese people, very friendly. That's why, because we do a lot of positive things rather than criticize them. No, we don't do it because we don't want to embarrass people. Next slide, please. Based on this culture, how this culture impact our marketing. Basically, like we said before, for employees, they lack of confidence to express their opinion, especially for opposing opinions. They don't want to share, especially in a group meeting. If you ask their opinions, basically, they will always say yes, always say, that's great, rather than give you their really real answers. For leaders, it's very, very difficult because this is kind of like you can't know their true thoughts. Maybe you will give them wrong directions. You will feel, yeah. All of them think it's great. Okay, let's do it. Then when you start it, you find out, oh, it's a lot of trouble. Then you don't know what to deal with it. So it means the big impact on marketing is misunderstanding. This is huge. For this problem, how we solve it? Number one, we can use one-to-one communication strategy. For Chinese people, because we need to keep face, that means we don't like group meeting. So find a time, find a private place, then do one-to-one communication. Then you can understand what they are really thinking. We say it, break the ice. Next one, if you feel like you have a big gap between each other and you can't using one-to-one communication to get their true thoughts, what you gonna do? You can find someone they really trust, then get that people to communicate with them. Then you can get their answer. This is really useful. Next slide. The third one is a harmony. Harmony for Chinese people, actually we are talking about relationships. So as you know, relationships is very important in China. We call it 关系. It's very important. When you need to build up trust, set up your business with Chinese, the first thing you need to do is build up relationships, good relationships with them. What we're gonna do? So for Chinese people, we not only talk about business, but also we need to share our personal life. For UK people here, it's very strange and it's very rude to talk about personal life, especially talk about your family issue, your family member. Ask your family, how is your parents? Are they healthy? How is your wife? How is your children? How is your kid? So this kind of question is very, very sensitive for people here. But it's very, very normal in China, especially you talk with Chinese people. If you talk for them, it means you care about them. If you don't talk, oh, you are cold blood, not okay. Next slide. How this culture influence our marketing? For employees, this is very big because they like a harmony environment. It means they don't want to change. They don't want to challenge. They don't want to get challenged. For this issue, for leaders, the big problem is you can't see potential problems or any conflicts in the team. They don't want to talk. They don't want to change, especially if we're doing some company reform. If we need to develop some new project, it's very hard because they don't share their feeling and they don't want to change. You will find it's very difficult to deliver these kind of new projects or company reform. How we do it, how we solve it? Basically, you can explain the reason for change. Give them pros and cons to let them think. Then maybe they will understand, oh, yeah, it's better. Then find a middleman, like we said before, to communicate with them, to understand what is the problem for them. What is their true thought? Then you understand better, then you can explain them better. Then, bit by bit, they will feel more confident to deal with new stuff. And don't forget, always praise them if they try some new things. Next slide. Here we have a leadership style. As we talked before, because Chinese culture is a hierarchy way, and we talk about harmony, we talk about save face, don't lose other people's face. So for Chinese leadership style, would be based on these three cultural issues. First one, like we said before, hierarchical way. So it means for the leader, they just deliver as they want. Then they expect the direction to be carried out as a request. It means just do as I say. This is the way. Second one, linked with our faith culture. So for leaders, they don't criticizing people. They don't criticizing the followers in front of people. They will use indirect way. Third one, we need to build up a harmony environment. For that reason, you need to do a lot of activities with them. Okay, ask them about their personal daily life, everything, get to know their hobbies, maybe celebrate their birthday with them to just build up a good relationship with them. Next slide, please. How this kind of a leadership style will impact our marketing. For employees, you will find this very common issue if you have Chinese staff in your company. They always isolated their boss. They will have their own activities and they don't invite their boss. They will have their own chat groups. There is no boss inside of them. They just talk as they can. So it means you will feel very, very difficult to fit into your own team. You feel isolated by them and you don't know why and you don't know how to solve it. This will directly impact our marketing because there is a lot of invisible resistance and conflict. You don't know and you can't see it. How we solve this problem? Basically, the first thing you can do, dispel their fears. It means just break the ice, okay? What we can do, try to care them because they like to be cared for and build respect. When they feel like, oh, there is actually not like hierarchical way before. Oh, I can trust my boss. Oh, we treat each other like friends. Then they will talk to you. Next slide, please. Next one, we're going to talk about time and scheduling. This is a kind of a big problem. I think a lot of companies face this kind of problem and they don't know what to do. In China, lateness is excusable. It means if you're late in China, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Because everyone will think about, yeah, you should have some trouble. So for trans people, when they feel they will be late, the first thing they were doing is start to thinking to make a good excuse. This is what they do, okay? So every time when they are late, they will give you a very good explanation to tell you why they're late. Because this is a Chinese culture, we accept lateness. It's very normal for us. But if you are a person always late, for Chinese colleagues, what they do to you, they just joke with you, okay? Just smiling and say, okay, yeah, you're late again today. What you did today? Oh, your tube is late, right? So they will give you this kind of joke and like a humorous penalty to you. Then you will feel a little bit shame, but not that very rude way. Then you will say, okay, next time maybe I can try 5 minutes earlier. Then they will do like that. But the good point is, For now, a lot of Chinese companies, they start to realize this is not a good thing, especially you are doing some globalization works, build up the other relationships with other countries or other companies. They will feel like, yes, we need to always talk about people, need always on time. So for that reason, now Chinese culture slightly changed. This kind of lateness is a reasonable culture. We change a little bit. However, next slide, please. You can still feel a lot of company, even in UK now, you have Chinese staff, we still have this problem. People always getting late. For employees, we call this snowball effect. If you don't solve this problem, you can see this effect. This month, 1 Chinese staff late for 3 days. Next month, 3 Chinese staff late. Maybe sometimes will affect our UK staff as well. Then this is like a nightmare for leaders. We don't know how to do it, and you feel things goes worse. Basically, 8 o'clock, we start to work. Because of them, now, 9 o'clock, 9:30, it's very bad. It's a bad working environment and a low morale. What we can do? So a lot of companies, they tried a lot of ways to solve this problem. Sometimes they find the staff and have a conversation with them. But we know the conversation for us, for Chinese people, we don't sometimes, yeah, we take it, but because of the cultural influence, we don't feel it's a very serious thing. Maybe next week, I'm gonna get another excuse, then I will say, yes, I'm late again. It's not my fault. So it means conversation doesn't help you. What we gonna do, and what Chinese companies usually do, deal with this problem? In China, we have very strict attendance system. We use a fingerprint, face points to check you. You just go to company, then you do it. Registration every time when you go in, when you go out. This is very strict in China. The other thing the Chinese company doing is introduce bonus system for punctuality. It means if you delay this month, it will maybe affect with your performance pay. Or if this month you didn't late at all, we give you bonus. For this strategy, you will get amazing outcomes. You will feel like, oh, this nightmare is gone. Everything goes better. Because for Chinese people, we do care about judgment and evaluation. It means you set up these 2 systems, will get a better result. You can try. Next slide, please. Next slide, we talk about communication style. As we said before, when you speak to Chinese people, please just think about saving their face. For that reason, when you talk, choose a nice way. Don't use very strong words to say something to them, especially criticize them. There is a very rude for Chinese people. Sometimes, if you really want to prove your point, don't argue with them. Just explain, to tell them the reason, then they will understand. Especially, don't criticize them. Third one, you can ask their personal details. You can ask their family, their private life, to get trust from them. Then you will build a good communication with them. Next slide, please. How these communication styles impact with our marketing? For employees, like we said before, they don't like being criticized. It means for leaders, if you want to point out your employees, especially Chinese employees' mistakes, please avoid point out in a group meeting. You can tell them in a private place, but not point out in a group meeting. That for them is very embarrassed. They were embarrassed. So for that reason, the marketing sometimes you will feel it's very difficult to correct or improve your stuff, your Chinese stuff. What we're gonna do, like we said before, linked with our culture, harmony culture, saving face culture. Please, when you criticize them, point out their mistakes. First thing you need to do, praise them, to tell them some positive stuff first. You can tell them, yeah, you did really good this period. You did 1, 2, 3. It's very good. Okay, I'm glad you did a lot of improvement. After that, you can point out their mistakes. If it's a long term, you can praise other people. You can say, look, if it's a group meeting, you can praise others. Okay, praise A. Yeah, Amy this week, she did really good because she did this, she proved that. Then for other people, they will feel like, oh, yeah, I'm not very great. Yes, I should have some problem. Yeah, maybe I did something wrong. Then they will start to thinking, because in China, you praise other people rather than them. It's a kind of a sign to imply that they need to improve for some part. Then they will start to think, yeah, how I can make it better. Because Chinese people, essentially, we are very, very smart, especially for this kind of understanding way. We can understand immediately, yes, we did something wrong. Then how I can improve it? Then they start to think. If they start to think, things gonna be changed. Then everything will be better. The third way is ask them the family personal details. It's like fit into their personal lives. Then build their trust. Then you will feel like the communication will much, much better than before. Next slide, please. Negotiation styles, especially for marketing. For Chinese people, we always talk about win-win outcomes. It means when you do some negotiation with them, don't be too aggressive. So stay in the middle, find a way. It's beneficial for two sides. We call it win-win outcomes. We really like because it's a harmony. We don't hurt other people's feelings. Then both of us, we get beneficial. Why wouldn't do that? The second way is we also can identify a member of a team, play like an intermediary role. It means this person gonna play as a go-between function, okay? This person is really trusted by leaders. And in the other hand, this person has good relationships with the Chinese team members. Then they will understand each other. Maybe the Chinese team members will tell this person something you don't know. Then this person can just deliver directly to you. Then you're gonna understand what's going on to solve the problem, to realize the problem quickly and solve it quickly. Next slide, please. This how impact marketing. The wrong case, the very bad case, is completely wrong direction, because you don't know that your negotiation way is wrong. So basically, you just go to a wrong direction. Maybe make someone angry. Maybe you misunderstanding them. Then you will get a bad result you don't want. So the suggestion is don't rush, just explain. Explain to them what's the pros, what's the cons, and always find win-win way. They like it. Next one, very important, to set up an intermediary role. The key takeaways, it's okay. The key takeaways for this Chinese culture session. First one, we will training and development step by step. Like we said before, if you assign a task, always give them a clear instructions to help them understand what you really need. Then give them some space to think privately. Then little by little, step by step, you will see they are actually improving. Next one, individual and team communication is very important. Please remember, if you are in a team, a group situation, please always praise them. Don't criticize them in front of other people. Find a private place, one-to-one communication to point out something wrong, but nicely. You can choose a praise to start to make this environment, make them feel happy to start with. Third one, like we said before, find an intermediary role is very important if you're dealing with Chinese team. Next one, we are talking about leadership styles. You need to have two of these, kind and strict. Kind with them, build their trust. Strict with them to set up some rules, especially for lateness problem. Number 5, reason is number 1. Like we said before, Chinese people, we are very smart and we understand. We can listen, we can think. If you need to do something, give them your reason, explain to them, then they will understand. So this is all the cultural session for marketing. I hope you guys enjoy.